Hi there, my name's Ben and I like to read. Today we're going to be reviewing our first graphic novel and probably one of the classics and the standards, if you will, of all graphic novels. It is V for Vendetta by Alan Moore and David Lloyd. So Alan Moore was of course the writer, David Lloyd the illustrator. V for Vendetta is a graphic novel, as I mentioned. Just a little bit of background before we get into the actual plot. This was actually written in response to the elections in the UK in the 1980s, where Margaret Thatcher came to power. It was believed that, she would bring about this new, very harsh, very authoritarian, jingoistic view of the United Kingdom. And I mean, again, this isn't a political channel, and I'm also not well informed enough to on the nuances of Thatcher's reign to make a definitive call on as to how her tenure was. There were benefits, there were drawbacks, of course. And again, her legacy is still very, very divisive. That's not necessarily what this episode is going to be about. This is what Alan Moore and David Lloyd thought would happen. I want to read for you, in fact, the preamble, the opening for it. It's kind of long, but I do want to just read the last little bit of this. I finished my drink and left, almost certain the TV would be silent for the rest of the evening. For after the 9 o'clock news would have come The Boys from Brazil, a film with few cheeky, cheery characters in it, which is all about a bunch of Nazis creating 94 clones of Adolf Hitler. There aren't many cheeky, cheery characters in V for Vendetta either, and it's for people who don't switch off the news. So, essentially what what David Lloyd and Alan Moore were trying to do, they were trying to give their sort of critique on the rising authoritarianism, essentially, more specifically, right-wing authoritarianism in the UK. And V for Vendetta follows two people, if you will. It follows this girl named Evie Hammond, who is this young teenager who's forced into prostitution because she got fired from her job. She ends up being apprehended by the secret police of the United Kingdom at this time, called the Finger, and she's rescued by the second main character in this book, the anarchist terrorist who is only known as V, and he sports a Guy Fawkes mask, which is now iconic. It's being used by anarchist groups and by activist groups such as Anonymous all over the world, and in part due to this book. This book is highly culturally influential. But essentially what it does is that it follows V's plan over the years to destabilize the fascistic government, which is led by this man called Adam Susan, who is, a fairly, again, an analog for certain other fascistic dictators in the past, who rules Britain with an iron fist, and V's job is to take him down. Now, we don't know much about V himself. What we do know is that, when the party that is now in control of the UK, Northfire, came into being, they started rounding up all perceived quote-unquote undesirables into these camps, and those included homosexuals, those included immigrants, people of different religions, and they not only, exterminated them, but they also performed experiments on them. And in order to develop some, who knows what they were trying to develop. V was one of those people. He responded to the torture and the experimental drugs that they gave him I don't really want to say well, but he certainly came out enhanced. His intellect is far surpassed. It has far surpassed what it was. He can make bombs from just about anything. He can, he's got a wonderful way of speaking, very eloquent. He can, he's supremely intelligent, to say the least. Peak physical condition, however, at the cost of he is extremely deranged. He is crazy. And I mean, who wouldn't be after all of that torture that you've been put through? But we don't know his full backstory. Essentially, this book follows him and Evie as V grooms Evie to become his successor, and V's plan to strike the final hammer blow to the ruling party. Now, I could go on for hours about how important this book is, because even if you don't agree with the political legacy of Margaret Thatcher or whatever, that's not necessarily really what this is about. Ultimately, or even if you don't necessarily agree with anarchism, ultimately what this book does is that it shows you what happens when you suppress people who think differently than you do, who look differently than you do, it's a cautionary tale of all forms of authoritarianism, of all forms of, perfidious ideology that unfortunately can worm its way into the human brain. And it really does show how ordinary people will just take it. The ones who shut off the news, so to speak, will just take it. Now again, it's funny that they would say, okay, yeah, this is for people who don't shut off the news. Meanwhile, in the book themselves, they actually see the how now mainstream media has been used and warped by the party in power in order to essentially act as a mouthpiece. And again, this is where again, it's a recurring theme for a lot of the books. You must be tired of me saying it, but this is about skepticism. This is about challenging that authority, about rebelling against it, because we have to remain skeptical. We have to remain vigilant in case this sort of perfidious and disgusting tyranny ever gets hold of our society. But at what cost? Now, Moore and Lloyd in this book posit that, okay, maybe a return to anarchy is a little bit preferable, because it will no longer be a land of you have to do this, and I'm paraphrasing right now, but the part that I do remember is that this will become a land of do as you please. And what that means is not a hedonistic sense of like, oh yeah, I can do whatever I want. I can loot and rape and pillage and murder. That's not what it's about. It's, if anything, I think what they do is they give a little bit too much faith to the ordinary person, in the sense that, like, yeah, by everyone doing it's almost a libertarian anarchist way of looking at it, a sense of like, if everybody does within their own self-interest, because people don't ultimately want to, harm other people or hurt other people or, infringe upon other people's rights and so on and so forth. And I mean, maybe they're right, but they could also be wrong. I mean, there's also, we've seen this throughout human history. Whenever going gets rough, there is a clamor for these rampant authoritarian measures, and people can be susceptible to demagogues of every single political stripe. People who are tub thumpers, people who, populists is a little bit of a nasty word these days, but yes, people who essentially are populists, or also these people who are, again, who don't present themselves as populists, but will sort of try to, in a very sort of non-traditional authoritarian way, in a non-traditional authority way, I should say, to sort of twist it and say, like, oh, it's all for the greater good. Like, yes, we have to, we all have to make sacrifices and so on and so forth. Whereas what this book illustrates is that, literal people have been sacrificed for the quote unquote greater good. And it's a cost that is too high. That is much too high. And this book is very politically charged. That's the best way to put it. No matter what your political stripe, it's an important book, and you should read it. The illustrations are fantastic. Alan Moore is a fantastic writer. The way in which this perfect marriage of illustration and language can create such a breathing and a living and breathing document that can elicit extremely strong emotion. I've got no bones. I certainly, the first time I read this, got fairly emotional. First time I read it, I think was not a couple years ago, about 5-6 years ago, and it was so heart-wrenchingly human. And I'm trying to collect my thoughts here, but as much faith as Moore and Lloyd give to humanity by positing their alternative, which is anarchism, which is something that, again, I personally think is a little bit misplaced. I'm happy to be corrected on that. They do know humans so well. They know that there is that clamor for authoritarian measures. They know that there is that desire to just be a part of the crowd and to be invisible in that crowd. And that it takes real courage to stand up for what you believe in. That it takes real courage to fight a system that is oppressing so many. And that it takes real courage to be who you are in a world that fundamentally tries to make you something that you're not. So, all this to say, and I didn't even mention that there's a movie adaptation with Hugo Weaving and Natalie Portman in there. Go check it out. It's a relatively faithful adaptation to it. I wouldn't necessarily say it's completely faithful, but it's a solid movie nonetheless. But I understand why Alan Moore has distanced himself from movie adaptations of his work, such as Watchmen, such as From Hell, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, just because again it adulterates the true meaning behind the original work. So if you've seen the movie, pick this book up and give it a read, because it is really interesting to see that parallel. If you haven't read the book, definitely pick it up. And even if you're not interested in comics, the language in this, for its own sake, is I used to turn my nose up at graphic novels. This one changed me. It really made me appreciate the art form a heck of a lot more. And I would go so far as to say that V for Vendetta would not work if it was just in regular print. I think that the reason why it is so powerful is because of David Lloyd's illustrations as well, and only he could have illustrated them. But that's of course an opinion that I'm sure will be debated and is debated amongst Alan Moore fans. So, like I said, if you've seen the movie and you haven't read the book, pick it up, read it. If you haven't read this at all, definitely check it out. Even if you're not that political, even if you're not necessarily that interested in comics, it reads really, really well, and it's interesting. It's something fresh and it's something new. It's something that's easy to read, and something that is not just your standard pulp comic book. The superhero goes in, laser eyes, and all that. No, there is real weight behind the story as well, which makes it, which makes you come back to it. It is definitely a book that you can reread over and over again. So for that reason, I would have to say do not skip out on it. In any event, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching.